Hi class, you did an awesome job on your discussion board, Game Changer Forks Over Knives. I wanted to point out a couple things because I think that there's a little bit of a misunderstanding here about incomplete proteins, protein from animals versus plants. I'm just going to bounce you through a couple websites. Obviously, I have the education so I can validate what we're actually reading and know. So yes, no, they're non-peer-reviewed sources. I'm going to be the peer this time. I want to remind you what we actually need, right? So, and when I say athlete, I'm not talking about someone who exercises. I'm saying a training athlete. So for example, when I was an ultra runner or I did triathlons and I exercised 25 to 30 hours a week, I was an athlete. I run now. I run ideally 15 to 20 miles a week. Sometimes it's closer to 10, homeschooling, COVID, you know how it goes. I'm not an athlete anymore. I'm a normal Joe out there just trying to move my butt. So I want you to consider how much protein you need. So you have to do the math. You know, an average woman, 140 pounds, needs only about 50 grams of protein, right? So I want you to consider that when we think of protein recommendations, because the problem is there's protein in everything you eat. So when we look to aim to meet a recommendation, we're not just saying, I need to go eat this much chicken. I need to go eat this much tofu. We're actually saying, actually, there's protein in everything you eat, so we need to be well balanced, right? And we're not aiming to meet that need. The average person in the United States doubles their protein consumption. And so I think that you have to consider that when you're thinking the specificity of is it complete or incomplete? So when we're talking about protein, we're talking about complete and incomplete. What are we actually talking about? We're talking about the fact that we have sources that come from plants that do not have all 9 essential amino acids. All sources from animals do, right? There's 20 amino acids, 11 are non-essential, 9 are essential, meaning that we need to consume them from our mouth. So a couple things about that. We do have complete protein sources inside vegetables. Quinoa, amaranth, soy, and actually there are a few more like spirulina and things like that you could add to a smoothie or whatever. But these are kind of like the key ones. Uh, the other thing is that when you pair two incomplete proteins, they become complete. So there's kind of a misunderstanding. People have this impression that we were going to break down muscle if you were eating incomplete proteins. That does not happen. And those two things are so far removed from each other. So the other piece of understanding is we do something called protein turnover. Think back. So protein turnover is we never waste an amino acid. So we are 100% amino acid and mineral, right? Besides water. And so our body is never going to waste an amino acid. So every time a cell breaks down, I've had like 500 in the 5 minutes I've been talking, break down. Our body break apart that amino acid chain. Every amino acid that's not damaged and will be excreted through urine, we are going to reuse. So we always have those amino acids available to pair with incomplete proteins. We rebuild our own protein from those broken down cells. The only way we are going to waste, meaning that we are going to go into a protein deficit, is if we are not consuming food, right? Or you're only consuming one food. You know, for example, if you're like, that's awesome, I'm vegan, I am just eating peas. All I eat is peas. I don't eat anything else. Yeah, you're not only are you going to have protein deficiency, you're going to have some nutritional deficiency across the board, right? So, because it's all about the balance. It is extremely easy to meet 100% of your protein needs by just eating plants. And you don't even have to think about it. A bean burrito with rice does the trick. And so I want you to consider that when you're wrestling this notion that it's all about the protein that comes from animals. Now there are other values to protein that can come from animals, like some vitamins and minerals, right? That we find in weaker amounts in other areas. But even as you're going to get into talking about iron, iron always comes up a lot. So guess what? There's something called non-heme iron, and it's only found in plants. Now, it's harder for our body to absorb. So that's one of the other questions about sources of protein that come from plants. Are they harder to take longer or harder for our body to absorb? Sometimes, but again, if you're eating a well-balanced diet, it's actually completely irrelevant. The other thing is this, when we're matching it with sport, one thing to understand is that you do not need protein when you are exercising. You need carbohydrates. Chapter 11, your whole body is fueled on carbohydrates. It is the key source to you actually being able to build muscle. If you overconsume protein, guess what happens? We deanimate it, like you read about, and we urinate out the amino acid and we turn it into a carbohydrate. And then if we can't use it, i.e. store it as glucose or glycogen, we turn it into fat. That is the fate of overeaten protein. Okay, so also understand that when you eat a bunch of protein, it doesn't magically stay around. Remember, we actually don't store amino acids. It's one of the few things we don't store, which is why we have protein turnover, right? But we're just not kicking with amino acids hanging out all the time. What our storage form is our muscle, right? And we're not gonna waste muscle if we can help it. So I also wanted to flash you to looking at the types of protein that exists in plants. Because the other thing is this, well, there's only 2 grams of protein in broccoli. Yeah, you're right. There's not a ton of protein in broccoli. But we come here, I don't really like tempeh. I love edamame. I love tofu. Look at how much protein is in something like tofu, right? And if I only need 50 grams of protein a day, that's a lot. And so this website, and I'll send it to you if you're interested in it, it just tells you what are the high protein plant sources here. And so you can kind of see satine, tofu, lentils. Now again, beans, lentils, legumes, so amazing for you on so many levels, right? Now, but you're going to say, but that's an incomplete protein. You're right. This 18 grams of protein is incomplete. So do you ever just eat straight lentils? Okay, yeah, we do in my house. But one of the other thing we love is Madras lentils, where you're actually mixing lentils and different types of beans and tomatoes. And guess what? That's complete after that. Guess what else we do? We pour it over brown rice. And it's awesome, right? And so not only am I going to eat too much protein today just by having that as one of my meals, the minute you add lentils and some vegetables to it, you don't even have to really think about it. And you might now be thinking, wow, she seems really passionate about that. She must be vegan. I'm actually not. And so we do eat animals in my house. We don't eat them very often. We believe in eating a plant-based diet. So there's that. But because the reality is that we actually don't need to eat animals the way we think we need to eat animals. That is my opinion, my belief system, my value system, right? And so we all bring our value systems into it. I saw one discussion board who mentioned that. I thought it was really poignant, right? We're going to bring our value systems into it. But in order to make sure that we're always making the best decisions, we have to be informed. And the discussion boards that you did were meant to be provocative, right? I was sometimes it's just nice to see something a little bit more provocative and not so humdrum, right? And so, of course, those types of discussion boards or those types of documentaries are leading you in a direction. That's kind of the point. That's what most documentaries do, right? But I wanted to validate some of the assertions that you heard. If you're interested, feel free to email me too. I do actually follow quite a few researchers that are vegan. And because the research is just amazing out of some of that area. I also follow some athletes who choose that route. Rich Roll, you met earlier in the semester when he was talking to Robin. Rich Roll, I love his podcast, not all of them. Sometimes he gets a little too out there for me, but a lot of his guests this is their line of study. And so if you're interested in the line of study, see, that's what I'm interested in, then those are some things to check out. But just keep in mind, in order to meet your protein needs, you do not need to eat animals. That's actually really not in question, right? It's really do you believe, or do you have the right information, right? And I think sometimes having the right information is really key. I think you're going to have a great time next week kind of researching these diets, because I picked these diets specifically because they all have research behind them to show why you should be on that diet. And that's really interesting. And this was also brought up too. The carnivore diet is you eat nothing but meat, but it actually has some research. But then you compare it to a vegan diet and you say, well, how did that happen, right? And so have a good time with that, but get into the science so you can find for yourself where you live. You know, my former husband, he is a pescatarian. He'll eat a little bit of yogurt and he will eat fish. And past that, he only eats plants, right? We don't totally practice that in this house, right? So I think that you can also take the science and say, okay, how does the science fit with what I believe, how I want to be, right? As long as you're never discounting other science. You know, I don't discount the other science. I take it into consideration, right? That's what makes you wise. You look at all points of view and you say, okay, what needs to be taken into consideration? That is my helpful rant, I hope. I hope you're having an awesome day. Thanks.